So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to Puerto Princesa in the Philippines, and specifically to the pool area of the hotel canvas here. Hey, the script was written, why wait till I get home to record it in my study upstairs when I can record it on location somewhere a bit more interesting. And thanks to Roy for sending me this wonderful shirt. If you've seen my video about Belfast City Airport, you'll probably get the joke. This isn't available as merchandise just yet, but watch this space. Now, when I make a video, I keep my fingers crossed that everything I talk about in it remains valid for as long as possible. And quite regularly and quite annoyingly, the companies I talk about will change something which renders that part of that video invalid. I've actually had quite a bad run of this happening lately. I featured a lounge in Helsinki that had actually closed by the time the video about it went live. The flight of that first class Emirates flight I took went up by about 50% before I had a chance to release the video. And a new lounge opened in Hong Kong before I was able to release my video talking about all of the lounges in Hong Kong. But these things happen, and once I've noticed a few changes, I get the opportunity to make a video like this. I really like to structure my videos around lists of 6, but I'm only going to talk in detail about 3 things today. Hey, I suppose I just mentioned another 3, which maintains my format. But I am going to talk in detail about changes that have happened at SriLankan, at British Airways and at Virgin Atlantic. And one of those changes is so significant I am wearing a black armband to mark my sense of loss at the change. And yes, I did bring this all the way here from the UK. So if you'd like to hear what's going on, stick around. Hi, I'm Matt and this is Matt's Planet. I aim to entertain, educate and inspire with my travel adventures from planning to execution. I'll show you how you can travel in style for a lot less than you'd think. So subscribe so you can come with me. So for many years, SriLankan has offered the best value tier point that you could find pretty much anywhere in the world. You'd fly from Abu Dhabi to Colombo onto Jakarta and back again. And each of those flights is just a whisker over 2,000 miles, meaning you'd earn 4 times 140 tier points, so 560 in total. Before the you-know-what, that flight could be had for 550 quid, meaning you were getting those tier points for a whisker under £1 each. Fares have crept up since then, and I paid £810 to do it last year, which is still a pretty respectable £1.45 per tier point. And it's a very enjoyable experience too. Even though Sri Lankan's airplanes are a bit clapped out, the service was always exceptional. Now, this trip was very well known about in tier point run circles and was even better known about once I started rabbiting on about it. I've heard from at least 50 people who've done the trip as a result of me mentioning it, which means there's been hundreds and hundreds of people making this run over recent years. And as Sri Lankan has been having all sorts of trouble with its clapped out old airplanes, many of those travellers have reported that they've experienced disruption when doing these trips. And many of them have reported that Sri Lankan had to book them on an alternate airline to get them back on track. Sri Lankan seem to do that quite willingly, and it's their responsibility to do it. But I suspect this has caused alarm bells to go off within Sri Lankan's finance team, as the cost of all of those rebookings is obviously mounting up, which means they have revisited how they price this specific flight. Now, straight after those prices were adjusted, you could regularly see it for £2,879 throughout the booking window, which is really quite depressing as it's a fun trip to do, and I was actually looking to repeat it as part of my next renewal strategy. Now, I looked again just before recording this, and the fare does seem to have dropped to around £2,100, albeit with a reduced schedule. Still too expensive to make it an efficient tier point run, but that price is moving back in the right direction. And it's a bit odd, the pricing from Dubai to Jakarta via Colombo is pretty much unchanged at around £1,500. That's just over £2.50 a tier point, which is probably just about okay. But it's obviously nowhere near as good as paying £1.50 from Abu Dhabi. Now, I've looked at all of the other originating points in the Middle East that you could start a trip on Sri Lankan from that would deliver the same 560 tier points, and Riyadh was the cheapest starting point I could find, which came in at about £1,334. Sri Lankan's other destinations in Asia that are over 2,000 miles away from Colombo are all in China, and they get really, really expensive. So Abu Dhabi has gone from being a pricing outlier on the low side to being on very much on the high side. I looked at what Sri Lankan would have to pay to fly someone directly between Abu Dhabi and Jakarta or in the opposite direction, and it's 1,400, 1,500 quid for a one-way flight. So I fear Sri Lankan's bean counters have spotted them paying thousands of pounds to get people home when they only received hundreds of pounds in fare from them in the first place. And that's never going to be a smart strategy, so they've hiked the pricing. Of course, they could just manage to operate the flights that they'd actually sold and keep the pricing the same, but that doesn't seem to be the way Sri Lankan thinks. And Sri Lankan's pricing was, at least at £2,800, very much in line with what Etihad and Garuda were charging. But I did notice a reduction in the scheduled frequency of that service, so maybe they are trying to get their operational efficiencies back in order, which might partly explain why the price is coming back down again. Or perhaps they noticed that business class bookings just completely dried up when they put the price up. So what's going to happen? Well, if Sri Lankan thinks they found a previously untapped business class market between Abu Dhabi and Jakarta that is going to be so price inelastic that they just pay this new fare, well, they're going to be disappointed. I suspect 90% of the people on these flights were just doing it for the tier points, so the cabins are going to go from sparsely populated to deserted. And that may lead them to bring the pricing back down again. But if they've done it because they're losing money hand over fist as a result of not being able to operate the schedule that they've sold, then this is probably no surprise. Which may mean the fares never reduce, which would be a bit odd because it would mean that fares from Abu Dhabi are considerably more expensive than they are from Dubai, which is only about an hour and a half up the road. It's almost enough to make me want to give up the channel and stop sharing these hints and tips with you, because it doesn't end well in some occasions, but it's Sri Lankan's pricing, and I suppose you just have to say it was good while it lasted. Right, on to point number 2, and I want to talk briefly about British Airways premium cabin food. BA has gutted the service it offers on a number of its business and I believe also first class routes. Hey, it's even got its own name, Brunchgate. So now any flights departing before 11:29 in the morning gets a brunch meal service rather than a lunch. Even though the meal service on a flight departing at 11:25 in the morning may not reach your seat until well past 1 p.m. Sounds like lunchtime to me. Would you like some nice Shiraz to accompany your Belgian waffles, sir? And flights departing after 9 p.m. will have an abbreviated dinner service with limited main course options and no starters. The logic there being that perhaps people will have eaten before they boarded the plane. A 9 p.m. takeoff may mean you don't get served until 10:30, so I suppose there is a little bit of logic to that change. Indeed, BA was probably seeing significant food wastage from those late departing flights, as many people would indeed choose to eat in the lounge before boarding and try and go straight to sleep. Although there must be a better way of addressing this than starving the people who do want to eat, people who will have paid a very large amount of money and will no doubt be expecting a premium experience. Someone has done a deep dive into the impacts of all of this, and they reckon that perhaps a third of passengers will be affected. So it's not as sweeping as it might first sound. I'll link to that analysis in the description. But this is out and out cost cutting from BA, and it is pretty outrageous. Older viewers may remember that they tried something very similar some years ago and reversed it almost immediately. The fight back from customers has already begun. We believe BA is avalanched with complaints, and there are rumours that they are already about to reverse ferret. Although given the lengthy planning and supply chain associated with catering a large number of planes, it's not something they can just fix overnight. I don't usually want stuff I talk about in my videos to get reversed rapidly, but on this occasion, I really do. So the last topic concerns Virgin Atlantic and the changes they have made to their loyalty program. They actually half announced the changes and left everyone to work out the rest of them when the changes actually went live. Which is an interesting strategy, and it led everyone to expect that these changes would be absolutely terrible, as Virgin seemed a bit embarrassed about revealing them before they actually happened. Now, I was going to record this video before those changes went live, but I realised that my video would almost immediately be invalidated because it would be going live after the changes had gone live. So I've held back and can now talk about those changes now they're in force. So probably the crucial point here for me, and one thing that hasn't been focused on particularly in the coverage that I've read, is that Virgin hasn't changed anything about how you earn points or you earn status. They are 49% owned by America's Delta Airways, and they do seem to have an overweight say in what Virgin does, despite not being the majority owner. But American airlines, including Delta, have moved to a revenue-based model of earning status. And there is a sense of inevitability amongst those of us that watch European airlines that they will inevitably follow suit. But all of Virgin's changes relates to how you spend your points, so I suppose we should be pretty thankful that they made no changes to how you earn status. Lots of others have talked about these changes in detail, so I'm going to talk about them slightly differently. Before the changes, Virgin made a fixed number of seats available on every flight for a fixed cost. The demand for those seats varied widely, but the supply had no mechanism for flexing to match demand. Many years ago, I acquired a degree in economics, and one of the first things you learn is that no market can be efficient if either demand or supply is fixed. And through these changes to their program, Virgin has actually addressed this. So let's really simplify this and assume that Virgin only operates 10 flights and makes one seat available for redemption on each of them. 3 of them operate in peak times where there is high demand for those reward seats. 4 of them experience average demand where supply and demand are pretty much in balance. And the last 3 operate at times where there is very low demand for those reward seats. Let's assume the price of each of those seats is 10 air miles. The 3 seats in high season sell, and probably sell the instant the flight is created. The 4 seats in the average season sell, but it might take a while for demand to find supply. And the seats in the low season are in such poor demand that they never actually sell, and those seats fly empty. So Virgin fills 7 of its 10 seats and yields 70 air miles for doing so. And they have quite a lot of grumpy customers who would have really liked to travel in peak time but weren't quick enough to grab the seats. So it's pretty clear that the price should flex to allow it to meet the demand, and that's what Virgin's changes have done. So let's flex those prices, and let's assume a high season seat now costs 15, an average season stays the same, and a low season is priced at 5. The high and average seasons seats still sell. The higher price in that high season doesn't put people off, but the low season seats also now sell, as there were people prepared to travel in those off-peak days at that lower price. So now Virgin would sell all 10 seats and would yield 100 air miles for doing so. It's interesting to speculate on the relative grumpiness of passengers as we consider these flexing options. The people who were grumpy that they weren't able to get those peak seats are still going to be grumpy, but the people who did get them are now going to be grumpy as well because they've had to pay more for the privilege. But people who got the seats in the low season are now going to be actually quite happy because they're going to feel they got a bargain. They paid a third of the price that others have paid, and they feel they're getting the exact same benefits. So overall, the level of customer grumpiness probably holds level. So one more example where I'll flex those assumptions more aggressively, but perhaps more realistically. And you can see that Virgin should be able to double the number of air miles it recoups for selling those 10 seats. And that was quoted as one of the objectives that Virgin set themselves as part of these changes. Going back to the grumpy-ometer, it probably goes up net overall with this more aggressive change, as the people who are getting those seats in the high season are now having to pay quite considerably more to do so. So when you look at the comments online from people reacting to this, there is quite an interesting mix of responses. Some people are outraged at the pricing being demanded for those peak season seats. Seats which many of those grumpy people would never have been able to get hold of anyway because they were so scarce, but the pricing does seem to have leveraged up more than I was showing in those examples. But some are quite excited because they're seeing some really good opportunities to travel on Virgin at a much lower cost than they've seen before. So how outrageous are these new prices? Well, I had a look at Cape Town for Christmas, and that was capping out at 350,000 points each way. I also looked at the Maldives for early March, and it was the same 350,000 maximum. So you could end up paying 700,000 points for a return to both cities if you hit the highest pricing day each way, which clearly takes that redemption out of most people's price ranges. But it is dynamic pricing, so those reward prices are going to reflect the cost of the cash seats. And it's always going to be stupidly expensive if you want to go to Cape Town for Christmas. So there's 3 points I'd like to add to this discussion. As part of these changes, Virgin now makes every seat on every plane available for a redemption. And they do this mostly by tying the cost of a redemption to the cash price. But on some low season flights, they will make a redemption seat available at a lower cost, because they can still make a profit at that lower cost, and they may need to reduce the price to flush out the demand so that the seat doesn't fly unfilled. They used to run sales where you could get a similarly discounted price, but it's now something you have access to year round without having to wait for a sale. And as every seat is available for a redemption, I'd be really quite surprised if they didn't achieve their goal of doubling the number of air miles they were seeing redeemed. The second point I'll make, which again doesn't seem to have been discussed widely online, is that Virgin seems to have used these changes as an opportunity to do away with some of the ridiculous cash pricing that was associated with redemptions. I recently paid a whisker under £1,000 in cash, in addition to the points I spent for a return in upper class to New York. And £700 of that, fairly outrageously, still went to Virgin as their revenues. And it does seem that the cash requirement for some redemptions has reduced as part of these changes. Not a great deal in these examples, but any reduction is welcome. And the final points to ask is, well, who actually has 700,000 points that they're willing to spend on a return flight to the Maldives or to Cape Town? And we're back once again to Delta's influence on Virgin Atlantic, because those people are, well, they're Americans. Probably the subject for its own video one day, and it is all a little bit complicated, but the way that interchange fees on credit cards work in the United States is quite different to how it works in Europe, which means Americans can accumulate a substantial stack of credit cards, each with a significant welcome bonus. Plus, it's also possible in the United States to manufacture spending through those cards, which can earn you a lot of points at minimal cost, or if you do it right, you can actually make a slight profit when doing this. So it's not uncommon in the United States for people to accumulate millions of points every year at very little cost. And to them, paying 700,000 points for a seat might not feel that expensive. Virgin has publicly said that it likes how KLM and Air France operate their loyalty programs, and those schemes are known for having a large number of US-based members with substantial points balances accumulated through credit card use. So American credit card holders are the people who could contemplate spending 700,000 points on a redemption, a number which European credit card users would consider ridiculous. So what do I think at the end of the day? As I've said many times, it's Virgin's scheme, not yours. And they are free to do what they want, and in many ways, my opinion isn't going to be relevant to them. They've done it anyway. But as I only really want to travel off-peak myself these days, these changes are probably positive for someone like me, as I would now expect to be able to find value travelling off-peak without having to wait for a sale. I said someone like me because I really don't like Virgin, and I'm not looking to fly on them anyway. I think they're on the decline, and their experience is inferior to many of their competitors. I still like their scheme though, as it does offer some interesting ways of getting inexpensive redemptions on their SkyTeam partner airlines, and I welcome them taking the opportunity to ease off a bit on the fees that they charge through their redemption scheme. But for me, even with the changes, Virgin just isn't an airline I'm excited to fly on. So thanks for watching. I hope that was interesting. Yes, it is a little bit hot. There is a swimming pool right there that I am now going in an express pronto fashion. Please give this video a like and leave me a comment. What do you think of the Virgin changes? What do you think of the Sri Lankan changes? Have you got the black armbands on? Please consider subscribing if you're new. And if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there is a Patreon account, blah, blah, blah. Thanks again for watching. I'm going to cool off. Goodbye. The cost of that first class Emirates flight, I don't... Oof. Get off. Get off. Just got attacked by a bug.